Good afternoon, my name is Matthew Cretul. I'm a senior reporter at the Ocala Gazette. I am here with Supervisor of Elections for Marion County, Wesley Wilcox. I'm going to conduct an interview today. Good afternoon, Wesley, how are you?
I'm doing well, Matthew. Good to see you.
Yeah, you as well, the Honorable Wesley Wilcox. So a couple questions I have for you today. I want to talk about your role with the Florida Supervisor of Elections, the statements that you issued both as yourself and the President of the FSE, and then also just some general, Marion County and Florida election questions as well.
Perfect.
So we'll start with your role with the Florida Supervisor of Elections. I know you're the president of that organization. Can you talk a little bit about what your role is and kind of what you do?
As the president, first off, when I was first elected a number of years ago, it was one of my goals just from the profession to be the president of the association. So I've worked my way up to that, and finally this past summer took office as the president of the FSE. FSE is the Florida Supervisors of Elections. It consists of all 67 supervisors in the state of Florida. 66 of us currently are elected. Currently the Miami-Dade supervisor is appointed, but will go to the elected status with, I can't remember if it's the 22 or 24 election cycle. With that, over the last 9 months to almost a year now, it just seems like there's been a creep of misinformation, and we call it MDM, which is misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And here in the state of Florida, it's just starting to where we're seeing a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but a few people come in with just wrong stuff and asking us. And so it's starting to get a little bit of a groundswell, and more people are starting to take this information, this misinformation, as fact, and it's just absolutely not. And so I started seeing it here in Marion County, as well as my colleagues in Lake County and Sarasota, just kind of all over the state of Florida. And as the president, I kind of do get to set some of our priorities, and one of my priorities is to attempt to set the record straight and give people, I want to be in the position of educating our voters and giving them valid, truthful, honest information, and allowing some of this stuff to perpetuate. As we've seen in my industry, a myth can just take on a life of its own. And think about what happens. The people out there are saying, well, your vote can't be trusted, or this. And what is the logical outcome of that? If somebody tells you your vote doesn't count, so it doesn't matter, what are you going to do? You're going to stay home. And that will be the beginning of the end of our democracy. That this country was built on participation, full participation, as much as you want to participate. And if we start hindering that, or allowing other people with misinformation to start tearing it down, where do we end up? I would almost say, this is a perfect storm for our overseas adversaries. What do they want to? How do you want to attack America? Attack it from the inside. Get people to stay home. And so, based off of that, that's kind of where we start.
And one of the words that you kind of mentioned there is trust, and that's one of the themes I took away from that. I know you issued not one but two different letters. It seemed like one first one was kind of more geared toward elected officials and that side, and the second was sort of more of a general population of Florida specifically, because that's a state we live in, a state you can control. And trust seemed to be kind of the theme that I took away from those. And how do you handle defending that trust and regrowing that trust if people happen to lose it in the institution?
It's if people lose trust in this institution, it will be very difficult to build back. Our first letter was to the elected officials as well as just candidates in general. How can you be an elected official or a candidate and sit idly by where the entire mechanism for which you hold that office is being destroyed. How could you come back and say, well, I'm the elected this or that, where you've stood by and allowed the election to be destroyed? How could you legitimately take claim to that office? And so that was our first spot, because a lot of times these people that are tearing it down have a platform, have a stage, and on that stage there's going to be somebody elected, and therefore it was to us and to them, look, you've got to stand up a little bit too, and sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, it is, but sometimes elected life is uncomfortable. After that memo went out, our next one was to our voters. In an attempt to reassure them. I fully believe that the vast majority of, especially Florida and Marion County voters, believe in our system and understand and trust our secure, open system. But if we allow some of this stuff to go unchecked, where do we end up?
Going back to the letters you were talking about just a minute ago, you sent them not only as Wesley Wilcox, the Supervisor of Elections for Marion County, but Wesley Wilcox, the President of the Florida Supervisor of Elections. How did those conversations go with the other 66 supervisors? You mentioned you had some conversations in the past. How did that go? Did you get any pushback from any of the other 66, or were they all really on board and felt like that message needed to get out?
I think we were unanimous in our support of this message. It was my idea to start sending the message, but before I did, I will tell you honestly that I've got an executive committee, which means there's a president-elect, vice president, so on down. I sent this message to that small group, that small committee, and there was a resounding support for it. And so with that, I commissioned a small committee within our organization to help me craft this message. And once they did that, it did a wonderful job. And then we put it forth as not only the president, which I'm a member, the executive committee, which I am a member, as well as the entire organization, all 67 of us. And I will tell you, to a supervisor, everybody has supported this. We supervisors, there are 67 of us. There are elected Republicans, there are elected Democrats, there are those that are nonpartisan without party affiliation. So we come from all three of the veins that you could have in the state of Florida. Very seldom do you have a unanimous decision between Republicans, Democrats, and nonpartisan. And for this issue, we were unanimous in one strong voice.
And I'm sure that felt good on some level, because you were putting yourself out there to a degree, and you were making yourself available and saying this is the statement that we all believe in. So knowing that you had 66 of your your fellow supervisors behind you had to feel good on some level, because you knew that they're going to have your back in there.
They do. It was a very strong show of support. We've seen my supervisors. Not only, because I am taking the point on this, therefore a lot of it is directed at me, but I've read media reports out of a lot of local media outlets, as well as some other national outlets that have interviewed a multitude of my colleagues that have just stood up and just complete support with me. The 67 counties in the state of Florida, about 15 of us are, of 200,000 or larger. But there's 35 of these counties that, the entire population of the county is 20,000, which is less than just the city of Ocala here. And so they don't have the capabilities from a messaging standpoint to put everything together. And so this gives them that talking point, able to help them communicate not only with their local elected officials, but as well as their voters.
Talking about the local, I guess, response and the local responsibility as well, educating the residents of Marion County, having informational, educational sessions where you can invite them in and say, here's how our process works, here's how we go about this, here's how it's done in full view, to allow for that trust to go back. I'm sure you had those on some level pre maybe 2016, 2017, but I also imagine they're probably, if they're not already in the works, they're already being designed at a much greater level.
You know, I will tell you, since I took office, I have welcomed groups into this facility almost virtually from day one. I've given tours to Leadership Ocala. I've given tours to scouting troops, homeschooling groups, a multitude of groups. So I've always been open. And I want people to come in because I feel one of the duties of the Supervisor of Elections is education. And I see that as one of our responsibilities. And I do a lot of myth busting as we're walking through this. So I doubt that I see much of an uptick just because I've always done it and invited groups in and spend several hours walking through a tour of the facility, highlighting the different areas that we do, the due diligence that we walk through, the security that we keep on our systems, both physically as well as any other way. So this has been a work of mine since virtually day one. I welcome. Somebody wants to gather a group of 8 or 10 together or more. Let's come do a tour. We're here. We are. Like I said, one of our charges in what we do is education. And if doing tours or question and answer sessions, that's right where we want to be.
And it seems like those were done in good faith because you want to, again, involve the citizens in there. But going back to the MDM, MDM that you brought up, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, that a lot of that's done in bad faith. How do you combat that bad faith attempt to undermine or bad faith to sow this discord?
That's tough.
That's not a small question, I know, I'm sorry.
That's tough. A lot of times if we have a group coming in that wants to talk, basically misinformation stuff, a Q&A, straight on Q&A. I said, prepare your questions beforehand. You don't need to give them to me beforehand, but bring in specifically the question. Don't give me generalities, of something very wide. If you've got something very specific, hey, we heard, this, bring it up, and I will literally show you why the information is false. I hate to repeat a lot of the misinformation, but there was a piece going out a month or so ago that listed that Marion County had, I don't remember the exact number, 8,000 to 10,000 voters or registered voters who had not cast a ballot in 8 years. And I said, well, and they brought it in, and I said, that's perfectly legal. It's federal law that you are allowed to be a registered voter, but then never cast a ballot. It's kind of like a homestead exemption, And so those who don't vote, we mail them a letter basically every 2 federal elections, say, hey, we see that you're registered, but you haven't voted. Is everything still good? And if that gets to you, the voter, and you say, yeah, everything's still accurate with my record, just like with your homestead exemption, you can throw that away. But we as an office, if we try to mail that to you and it comes back to us as undeliverable, then we're going to start an investigative process to see, are you still there? Are you still eligible? We had almost 270,000 eligible registered voters in November of 2020. We had a historic turnout. 205,000 people cast a ballot. Do the math there.
Yeah.
There's about 65,000 people who did not vote for whatever reason. Why? I mean, it's kind of beyond my thinking why you would not participate. But that 65,000 had a reason.
Right.
And that's their prerogative.
Okay.
But that's one of the misinformations that people share, and they tell a voter that, look, You know, you had 8,000 people who haven't voted in 8 years. Why are they still on the rolls? Well, just from a headline perspective, maybe that sounds a little nefarious. But then as soon as you give me an opportunity to speak a little bit, everybody goes, oh, you're right.
Is it hard on some level, or maybe you've been doing it long enough, that it's hard to not take it personally when you hear these integrity claims and you, again, it's your job and you are an elected official, but also that does strike to who you as a person, this thing, are doing your job, and that's just not the case.
It is difficult. You know, you can come at me or come at my office from a party perspective or whatever else, and I'm okay. I'm okay. I understand that, you know, that's part of the job I signed up for. Attacking the conduct of our elections is tough for me. Because then I feel you've attacked my integrity. And, you know, party, whatever, that's fine. But as soon as you start attacking my and my team's integrity, it's a bit tougher to deal with and to stay even keeled, because, you know, somebody can say, you know, you just cheated the system, and I'm like, you know, I've been doing this for 30 years of my life. This is my chosen profession, and it is a profession. And I work extremely hard, me and my team, to be the very best election officials that anybody has anywhere else. And we are competitive in that nature, and that, you know, we want to not only be the best, we want to be recognized that, you know, we are very good. And so when you come in and you attack our integrity, it's difficult.
Is the guardrails that really keep that there, because it allows that neutrality for you to do your job above the party infighting and the party fighting and back and forth. It's going to be there because that's the way the system is.
And let me give you a quick example. You know, as the president of the association, and a lot of the media reports right now, virtually everybody knows my party affiliation. The president-elect, the person that will take office after I leave, I was asked about 3 months ago to appoint 2 people to a federal commission. They wanted me to be on there, and then they wanted someone else from the other major party to be on there. I had to ask the guy who's going to take office after me what party he's registered with, because I didn't know. And I've known this individual for 25 years. It's not part of our vernacular. It's not part of our conversations. And we just do this. And your own personal stuff stays your own personal stuff. It's
just so baked into the role that not that you forget it, but you're used to being so nonpartisan. It was like when the hyper partisanship shows up, it sort of rocks the boat a little bit, because that's not in the world that you occupy.
I concur.
Okay. And then on the other side, when you have supervisors, there was one in Texas, I believe, that was really that faced a lot of pushback from their local residents, and their office was getting a lot of calls and a lot of again, negative attention. Have you seen anything like that here? You know, is that something where it's one thing to get a phone call that says I disagree with this, it's another to get a threatening letter, or to get a presence of somebody show up or anything?
Unfortunately, you know, that's part of the other conversation that we need to have. You know, attacking our election officials, our professionals, and with threats, either physical threats, verbal threats, or even partisan threats. You know, people say, well, if you don't do something, we're going to primary you up. You know, these are people that have conducted this for a number of years, and all of a sudden, you know, I'm a working guy that I've chosen to conduct elections, and all of a sudden, I've got these threats coming at me. We've already had, I had one retirement this summer, a gentleman that I provided his 20-year anniversary, we do a clock in our association, this past summer when I took office, 2 months later, he turned in his resignation to the governor. It was like, I just can't deal with what's coming at us anymore. It's not about conducting the election. It's about fending off partisanship, and it's unhealthy. Just from a personal health matter, and so I'm afraid that as we move forward, if we continue to do this, the toll it's going to take not only on the existing population, but also of the upcoming population. Because for me to be a good administrator, I've got to keep my eye on today, but I've also got to recognize that, even long after I'm gone, somebody needs to do this, and I need to start, I feel, prepping my team and pulling people up and educating them. But if everybody around us sees the attack that this person takes, why would you want to go do that? Why would you want to open yourself up to those type, not only partisan attacks, but personal attacks? I've read some of the comments out of the interviews I've done over the last week, and there's some very personal attacks at me, and I'm like, wow, it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, and that's got to be, again, you got to have a thick skin to do this,
Yes.
but it seems like, again, in the 30 years you've done this, it seems maybe it's ratcheted up in the last 4 or 5 years to levels that you haven't seen, I would imagine, in the 25 previous years.
30 years ago, or a little over 30 when I started doing this, the institution of elections has changed, 180 degrees. It really has. Not only from, 30 years ago, an election could, all the preparations for an election could probably be done in about 5 days. Now it's a 90-day process. All the other pieces and parts that go into building this is a full-time, everyday job, that we do it so that we can carry on. The supervisor of elections, probably 30 years ago, there wasn't much thought about that job. I've had people tell me, a few years ago that, oh, that'd be great to be able to do, you just kind of deal with this. And over the last 18 months to 2 years or 3 years, I've had more people tell me I would never do that. There is no way you could ever get me to sign up to go do that. And it's a new mentality for us.
Last question is a pretty easy one.
Good.
The 2020 election was free and fair, correct?
It is. Somebody asked me the other day, very specifically about the November 20 election, and I will tell you without a doubt, I feel the 2020 November general election was the best, most securely conducted election in the state of Florida, bar none. Because you always hear of something happened in a South Florida county or this one. There was none of that this time. I think the entire state election professionals, the election workers, and the voters, I think, did a wonderful job. We had record turnout. We conducted it during a pandemic where we had polling places that were closing in other times. It's about as stressful an environment as you can get. And these people pulled it off. We knew coming into this that the presidential election in the state of Florida was going to be a focus point. Why wouldn't it be? Florida is the largest swing state in the nation. We've held that distinction now for a number of years. Why would people not just focus right here? And the focus, it stayed on, and everybody did exactly what they were supposed to do. And so I am proud of the state of Florida and the conduct of the election that we did in November.
And it sounds like because of that, the election's not going to be overturned. That's not a thing, is it?
No,
That's not
there's
a
no
thing.
such thing.
No do-overs.
There's no such
Okay.
thing. You know, listen to what Governor DeSantis said. Listen to what our Secretary of State said. You know, and there was even a media clip from 5 or 6 weeks ago from former President Trump that mentioned, you know, the way the state of Florida did it. They conducted a clean election, and so you get all of these things as well as the examples of reality of different things as we go through here. You know, we did a wonderful job, and we look to carry forth as we move on.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Wesley. I really appreciate it. That'll conclude our interview with Supervisor of Elections of Marion County, Wesley Wilcox. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your afternoon.